Eyeballs, jars, bones hung like butcher, and dried human flesh disguised as food. This was the chilling discovery inside Zhang Yongming's home. For years, villagers had wondered where their missing sons had gone, never suspecting that the quiet man at the edge of town could be involved. But the horror only grew when they realized he had been selling human flesh at the village market, tricking his neighbors into unknowingly consuming his victims. This is the true story of a nightmare that shattered a peaceful village, of families whose lives were torn apart, and of a community that trusted the wrong man. Zhang Yongming was no ordinary neighbor. He was a monster in human form, hiding his evil behind closed doors. This tale of horror will leave you questioning how well we truly know the people around us. Chapter 1. When boys began to disappear. It all began with whispers. In the peaceful village of Nanmen, tucked away in China's Yunnan province, families began noticing something deeply unsettling. One by one, young boys were disappearing. First, it was a child who had gone to the market and never returned. Then, a teenager who vanished on his way home from school. Days turned into weeks, and more boys were simply gone. Parents frantically searched, reaching out to neighbors and calling the police. Everyone feared the worst, but no one had answers. What could be happening to these boys? The small, close-knit village felt a cold shadow creeping in, one that grew darker with each new disappearance. Chapter 2. Desperate searches and silent streets. As the disappearances continued, families in Nanmen became desperate. The once lively streets grew quiet, and children no longer played outside. Mothers and fathers went door to door, showing pictures, clinging to the faint hope that someone had seen their sons. Rumors swirled. Maybe the boys were being taken to work in illegal factories, or maybe they had run away. But as more families came forward, these theories faded. Something far more sinister was happening, something that no one could quite grasp. Every corner of the village seemed haunted by fear and silence. Parents held their children tighter, wondering if they would be the next to go missing. Chapter 3. Who was Zhang Yongming? In the heart of the village lived a man named Zhang Yongming. He was a farmer, quiet and withdrawn. To most villagers, he was simply a strange, lonely man who barely spoke a word. Few dared to approach him, and fewer still could claim to know him. But Zhang was no stranger to the police. Many years before, he had been convicted of murder and sentenced to death. A twist of fate saw his sentence reduced, and he was released back into society. Given a small plot of land near his village, Zhang returned to a life of isolation. To the people of Nanmen, he was just a shadow, a man with a dark past that no one dared to question. Little did they know, the secrets Zhang kept were darker than anyone could imagine. Chapter 4. Signs ignored, warnings in plain sight. The strange man at the edge of town began behaving even more mysteriously. Neighbors sometimes noticed odd things about Zhang's home, strange smells, dark plastic bags hanging outside his door, and fires that burned late into the night. There were stories of meat being sold at the local market. Meat Zhang claimed was ostrich. But in a village where neighbors kept their distance, these clues went unnoticed, or perhaps ignored. No one dared to imagine that Zhang could be involved in something truly horrific. No one wanted to believe that the missing boys, the quiet stranger, and the odd behavior could somehow be connected. The warnings were there, right in plain sight, but no one saw the true danger. Chapter 5. A grim discovery, bones and secrets inside. Finally, in May 2012, the investigation led police to Zhang's home. What they found behind those closed doors would forever scar the memory of Nanmen. Bones, neatly wrapped and stored in plastic bags hung from the walls. There were glass jars lined up on the shelves, each containing preserved human eyeballs. Strips of dried flesh were found scattered around the house, as if prepared to be sold or consumed. The police were horrified. They realized, with growing dread, that Zhang had not only murdered these boys, but had also taken something far more grotesque. He had used their remains, allegedly selling their flesh as food and feeding some to his dogs. The quiet man with the hidden past, the one everyone avoided, had been living among them, hiding a nightmare in plain sight. Chapter 6: Horrors Unveiled, Flesh, Eyeballs, and As investigators combed through Zhang Yongming's home, the full extent of his gruesome deeds began to emerge. Police uncovered strips of human flesh, carefully hung up to dry, preserved as though they were cuts of meat ready for sale. In glass jars, officers found human eyeballs preserved in alcohol, like some twisted collection. The eerie arrangement of these trophies made even the most seasoned investigators shudder. Then, the final, horrifying detail fell into place. Zhang had been selling this flesh in the village market, telling unsuspecting buyers it was For years, villagers had unknowingly consumed the remains of the very boys they once searched for, boys who had vanished without a trace. The realization sent waves of shock and disgust through the community. They had trusted this man, even if from a distance, and he had betrayed them in the most nightmarish way possible. Chapter 7: The Unseen Victims, the horrors neighbors never knew. For the families of Nanmen, the true horror was that this unimaginable evil had been hiding in plain sight. Sang Yongming was the quiet man they had seen every day, the man who nodded politely but kept to himself. Now, as they pieced together the story, they realized the warnings had been there all along: the strange smells, the late-night fires, the dark plastic bags. Families of the missing boys replayed those moments endlessly, haunted by what-ifs. What if they had pressed harder? What if they hadn't accepted the silence from local police? Some villagers questioned their own role, wondering if, in ignoring the signs, they had somehow contributed to this terrible tragedy. It was a quiet realization of just how easily evil can blend into the background, going unnoticed until it's too late. Chapter 8: Justice Awaits, Zhang's Unmoved Silence in Court. Sang Yongming was finally brought to trial, facing charges of cannibalism and desecration. As the families of the victims watched him enter the courtroom, they hoped for some sign of remorse, some glimpse of humanity. But Zhang remained eerily silent. His expression was blank, his eyes devoid of emotion. For him, it was as if this was nothing more than a formality, as if he felt nothing for the lives he had taken. Families wanted answers, closure, but Zhang offered none. Throughout the trial, he refused to apologize, refused to acknowledge the depth of his crimes. His silence only deepened the wounds of those he had hurt, leaving them with an emptiness that words could never fill. In the end, Zhang was sentenced to death, but for many, justice felt incomplete. They would never get back what they had lost. Chapter 9: Aftermath, a village haunted and families forever changed. Even after Zhang was executed, the scars he left behind remained. Nanmen village would never be the same. Streets, once filled with laughter and children playing now, felt heavy with sorrow and loss. Every corner seemed haunted by the memories of those who had vanished, the young lives taken by a man they had trusted to live among them. Families mourned not only the boys who were lost, but also the innocence of their village, a place once filled with warmth and community. They held each other close, clinging to what little comfort they could find, but a shadow hung over Nanmen. Parents kept their children close, fearful and distrustful. forever haunted by the memories of the monster who had walked among them. Chapter 10. Lessons from Nanmen. A Nation Demands Answers. Zhang Yongming's crimes shocked China and sparked a national conversation about safety, justice, and the flaws in the system. How had a man with a violent past been allowed back into society without oversight? Why had the local authorities ignored the cries of families as boys kept disappearing? In response, a movement began. The nation demanded change, a reevaluation of parole practices, stronger police accountability, and better protections for communities. The families of Nanmen, still broken from their loss, found hope in the belief that their tragedy could serve as a lesson for future generations. Zhang Yongming's horrifying legacy would remain a dark chapter in China's history, a story of unimaginable loss, but one that inspired change. The monster was gone, but his story served as a stark reminder, a reminder that a community's silence, whether from fear or indifference, can sometimes allow evil to flourish.